Welcome back. This is day 3 of human reproduction. So today we're talking more about the female reproductive system, and specifically, how does the anatomy or the structures of the female reproductive system allow for reproduction to occur? All right, but first we've got a do now question. So we are looking at the side view of the female reproductive system. Go ahead and pause this video. Tell me what structures 1 through 4 are, and press play when you're ready to review them. All right, so you should have told me that structure number 1 is the fallopian tube. Now, we also need to know that this is where that process of fertilization occurs. So when we've been talking about the sperm combining with the egg in a process known as fertilization, we need to know what happens in the fallopian tube. So as soon as the egg is released from structure number 2, it'll travel down into this tube. And if it meets with a sperm at any point during that journey, it will become fertilized, which means that number 2 is going to be the structure known as the ovary. This is where eggs are stored, and then once a month, an egg is going to be released from that ovary through a process known as ovulation. Now remember, there are 2 ovaries, and they're basically going to alternate turns. So 1 month your left ovary might release an egg, and then the next month your right ovary might release an egg. It'll alternate, but just 1 egg is released per month. All right, now that egg is going to be released from the ovary, travel down through the fallopian tube, and if it is fertilized, it will implant itself into the side of structure 3, which is known as the uterus. This is where fetal development takes place. So that fertilized egg will latch itself onto the wall of the uterus as it grows and develops into an embryo. All right, but if that egg is not fertilized, it needs to leave the body. So this is where the egg, as well as the uterine lining, is going to be released from the body every single month through a process most of you probably known as your period, but that structure right there, number 4, is your vagina. Now, some of you might be wondering, but yesterday we learned about something called the cervix. There it goes. Now, where exactly is the cervix? So the cervix is going to be this kind of in-between barrier, in between the uterus and the vagina. So I'm going to erase that arrow. And then this right here is known as your cervix. So again, it is kind of that barrier between the uterus and the vagina. It's that in-between like doorway. Now, yesterday, we also pointed out this structure right here. Remember I said that it is very, very close to the uterus, which means that when a baby is developing, it's going to exert a lot of pressure onto this structure, which is why pregnant women often have to use the bathroom a lot. And that is because this structure right here is known as the bladder, which means that this structure right here is going to be the urethra, where that urine leaves the body. But you guys did not have to write those 2 down. That is just me making some connections to what we said yesterday. All right. Now, today is all about the menstrual cycle. My computer does not want to go. There it is. Now, some of you might be thinking, I know about my menstrual cycle. It's just those 4 to 7 days that I'm bleeding, and like that's it. But trust me when I say that is just the beginning of a full month-long process that is called the menstrual or the menstruation cycle. So in this GIF right here, you can see that there's a lot happening in this menstruation calendar, and it is a full month-long process that repeats every single month. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the steps that happen in this menstruation cycle, as well as the structures and the hormones involved. But the first thing we're going to do is read through a passage about the female reproductive system. So you guys know the drill. As we read through this, make sure you are annotating anything that's important in this passage, and we're going to use that information to answer questions 1 through 4. All right. The female reproductive organs, the ovaries, are located within the lower portion of the body cavity. In the ovaries, each egg cell is present in a tiny sac called a follicle. About once a month, the follicle matures and bursts, and the egg is released from the surface of the ovary in a process called ovulation. The egg cell then passes into the fallopian tube, or oviduct, which leads to the uterus. If sperm are present, fertilization may occur. If the egg is not fertilized, it degenerates. The lower end of the uterus, the cervix, opens into a muscular tube called the vagina, or the birth canal. When embryonic development is complete, the baby leaves the body through the vagina. Okay, now about hormone production. The ovaries produce the female sex hormones estrogen and progesterone. These hormones regulate the maturation of egg cells, as well as the development of secondary sex characteristics, including the development of the mammary glands and the broadening of the pelvis. Estrogen and progesterone are also involved in the menstrual cycle and pregnancy. Okay, so using that information, guys, go ahead and pause this video, answer questions 1 through 4, and press play when you're ready to review it. Number 1, where does egg maturation occurs? Or where does it occur? So egg maturation occurs in these structures known as the ovaries. This is where those eggs are stored, and then once a month they are going to kind of violently burst through the wall of the ovary and be released into the fallopian tube. And that process is known as ovulation, when that egg is going to mature and then be released from the ovary. Number 2, where does fertilization occur? So we've had this a few times. Hopefully you've picked up on it by now. Fertilization occurs in those structures known as the fallopian tubes. As soon as the egg is released from the ovary in ovulation, it'll make its way down into the fallopian tubes, which you might also see called the oviducts, but we'll use the words fallopian tube more frequently. And if sperm are present at any point when that egg is in the fallopian tube, fertilization will occur. But you might also have seen if the egg is not fertilized, it degenerates. This just means that that egg is going to break apart and be released through what we know as our period, along with the uterine lining. Number 3, where does fetal development occur? This development occurs in the uterus. So if the egg is fertilized, it's going to implant itself on the wall of the uterus and prepare to grow and develop and be nourished. And number 4, what are the 2 main hormones or 2 major female reproductive hormones? We've said these a few times, so hopefully we know by now. These 2 main hormones that we're going to hear about a lot are known as estrogen and progesterone. However, we're also going to learn about 2 new hormones today, so be ready for that. All right, now, the next thing on your worksheet, I don't want you to panic. This diagram looks super confusing, but I'm going to break it down with you. So I'm not going to lie. This diagram appears on the Regents a lot. The Regents loves to put these diagrams of the menstrual cycle, and we're looking at multiple things here. So I'm going to show you what each of these sections on this graph mean. This section at the very top, we're looking at hormone levels. Okay, so we're actually looking at 4 different hormones, and you can see they each have a different pattern of line to trace those different hormone levels. This second part of the graph, we are looking at the ovary and egg activity. Okay. This third part of the graph, we are looking at the uterine lining or the endometrium thickness. Okay, so uterine lining / endometrium thickness. Remember, the endometrium is just another word for that lining of the uterus. And then at the very bottom, we're looking at basically a timeline. So you've got a calendar of the days of the menstrual cycle, as well as the different stages of the menstrual cycle that we are in. So I'll put calendar / timeline. All right. So although this looks super confusing, I think we can figure it out together. So right now I want you guys to pause this video and see how many of these questions you can figure out by analyzing what you see on this diagram. So again, at the very top, we see hormone levels of 4 different hormones. The second part of the graph, we're looking at the ovary. So this is the ovary and this is the egg. Looking at ovary and egg activity. The third part, you're looking at the thickness of the uterine lining or the endometrium and how it changes. And at the very bottom, you're going to see a calendar or a timeline of the dates of the menstrual cycle, as well as the stages of the cycle that we are in, okay? So here is your send off. You've got this. Pause this video, answer questions 5 through 8, and press play when you're ready to review them with me. All right, so again, this is a diagram overviewing the month-long process of the menstrual cycle. So number 5 is asking us, what is the average length of the menstrual cycle? Well, if we look at our timeline, we see that we start over here with day 1, and it's going to go all the way over to day 28 until it repeats. This is a month-long process. The menstrual cycle repeats every month. So we're going to say that the average length of that menstrual cycle is 28 days, or about 1 month. Okay. Now, number 6, approximately what day does ovulation occur? Well, we need to know that ovulation is when the egg leaves the ovary. And if we look at this diagram, I see that this structure right here is my ovary and the egg is inside of it. Well, I see that the egg is going to release from the ovary in this stage right here. Now, if we look at the calendar or the timeline associated with that, we see that the egg is going to release from the ovary, or ovulation is going to occur around day 12 to 14. So that is when the egg breaks free from the ovary and begins to make its way into the fallopian tube. Now, number 7, I told you we were about to run into 2 new hormones, and here they are. So which 4 hormones help regulate the menstrual cycle? Well, there's 2 that we already know about. We know about estrogen, we know about progesterone. We know that those are 2 female hormones involved with the reproductive cycle. But we also see that there are 2 new hormones here. And those 2 hormones are abbreviated FSH, or fish as I like to think about it, and LH. And those 2 hormones stand for follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, or LH. Now, I will not require you guys to memorize those words as long as you just know the abbreviation FSH and LH, because I know those are some tricky words to remember. And we don't need to know too much about their actions. I just want you guys to know that we see that FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, triggers the beginning of the follicle stage, and luteinizing hormone, or LH, triggers the beginning of the luteum stage. Okay, but just know that they trigger different stages in the menstrual cycle. But those 4 hormones that regulate it are estrogen, progesterone, fish, and LH. And number 8, which day is the beginning of menstruation? So menstruation is what we like to think about point blank as when you start bleeding, when that period begins. And remember, your period is just when the endometrium lining, or the uterine lining, as well as that egg, are released from your body. They start to shed and exit the body. And that actually happens on day 1. I know it was kind of tricky to see on this diagram. Let's see, where is my... There it is. So day 1 is when menstruation actually begins. This is when the shedding of the endometrium occurs. And the menstrual cycle actually repeats every time, or let me say that again. It starts over every single, I am really losing my abilities here. The second that you start your period, the second that you start bleeding is when that menstrual cycle starts, and that entire cycle starts to repeat itself. So this happens again about every 28 days, every month it repeats. And this same process happens over and over and over until a woman goes through menopause, and this stops happening. But if we look at this diagram right here, we see that the uterine lining starts to decrease around day 1. Okay, that decrease signals that it is being released from the body. And again, you can see it restarts over here. Menstruation, it says about 4 days. It varies by women, so it can be around 4 to 7 days. But menstruation is when that uterine lining is going to be decreasing because it is being released from the body. So endometrium released from body. Now, I didn't mean to write that in red, but I guess it works. It's pretty timely. All right, guys, and that is all I have for you today. So using this information, answer the questions on your exit ticket, and make sure to submit this document as well as your exit ticket before tomorrow morning at 8:30. This is a confusing topic, so if you have any questions, please reach out to me on Remind. But other than that, have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.